Did you know a gang of starving peasants once painted their faces bright red and nearly toppled the mighty Han dynasty? Picture dusty fields turned to battlefields. Desperate farmers turned warriors storming palaces. No swords, just crimson eyebrows and raw fury. Buckle up, because the Red Eyebrows Rebellion is about to flip everything you thought you knew about ancient China on its head. I want to take you back to a time of drought, famine, and emperors more obsessed with palace intrigue than the people starving outside their gates. We're talking 1st century China. You've probably heard of the Han dynasty. Think infrastructure, trade routes, silk, Confucianism on steroids. But beneath that golden veneer, something was rotting. And into that chaos marched a ragtag band of peasants with eyebrows dyed the deepest crimson. Why? Because rebellion needs flair, of course. Today I'm unpacking how these unlikely warriors shook the foundations of empire, who they really were, and why their uprising still matters when we talk about the power of the people. Ready? Let's dive in. First off, picture this. It's 17 AD, and China is scorched. Crops have dried into dust. Rivers are straggling streams. Families are desperate. You've got parents watching their kids waste away day by day, and plenty of folks thinking, maybe we're cursed. The Han court, insulated by walls and eunuchs, is blissfully unaware, or maybe they just don't care. Empress Dowager Wang and her nephew, the puppet Emperor Gengshi, are too busy playing thumbs up, thumb down with palace favorites. Meanwhile, out in the provinces, peasants are banding together. Why starve alone when you can starve with friends? It's sad, but also oddly human. When survival is on the line, alliances form fast. Now, here's where it gets weird. These peasants aren't your average angry mob grabbing pitchforks. They decide to dye their eyebrows red. Yes, red. Maybe it was symbolic. A blood oath against the Han, a way to scare the living daylights out of their enemies, or just a really good look for the apocalypse. They called themselves the Red Eyebrows, and rumors spread like wildfire. They're coming! And people actually believed it. When you're starving, you'll believe anything that gives you hope, or scares you into action. Pause. If you're still with me, do me a favor, hit that like button. I promise more eyebrow fashion tips later. Just kidding, sort of. So these rebels start gaining traction. They move province to province, recruiting anyone who's lost a harvest, a home, or their mind. They loot granaries, burn officials' homes, and grow bolder by the day. Think guerrilla warfare before the term existed. They might have been peasants, but they learned fast. Strike hard, vanish, strike again. The Han army? They're too big, too slow, and frankly, by 23 AD, things have escalated. The puppet emperor is toppled. Chaos reigns in the capital. Enter Lu Xu, a distant cousin of the Han royal line, who proclaims himself Emperor Guangwu and tries to reunify the empire. But here's the kicker. The red eyebrows don't just vanish. They make their own emperor. Lu Penzi, a kid who probably wondered why he was wearing a crown made out of straw. Imagine being crowned because you look like you've never killed a fly. Shows you how desperate they were for legitimacy. Fast forward a bit. Lu Xu's forces clash with the Red Eyebrows in a series of epic, brutal battles. At one point, the rebels even besiege an entire city by digging canals. You're sitting there thinking, okay, that's impressive, until you realize they also flooded the place. People, horses, livestock, all floating like debris. It's like a medieval natural disaster, inflicted on purpose. Talk about extreme measures. Here's where I didn't expect it either. Instead of annihilating the Red Eyebrows, Guangwu switches tactics. He co-ops them. He offers amnesty, food, land, basically everything they ever wanted from the get-go. And they bite. Why fight when you can feast? So the Red Eyebrows slowly disband. Their leaders accept posts in the new administration, and Liu Penzi is shuffled off to a cushy retirement. Somewhere. No burgers or Netflix, but hey, at least he got a little pension. Take a breath. Crazy, right? Rebel, conquer, then merge with the winning team. Feels like something out of a corporate takeover saga. But there's more. This rebellion exposes a recurring theme. When central authority neglects the people, ignoring famine, corruption, and inequality, rebellion is inevitable. It's not just ancient history, it's a lesson echoing through time. From peasants in China to protesters on modern streets, the message is clear. Ignore the masses at your peril. Now let's pause for a quick re-engagement. If you're geeking out over ancient warfare, or just here for the eyebrow dye tutorial, drop a comment below with your favorite rebel army. I'm Team Spartacus myself, but these red eyebrows are giving him a run for his money. Segment 6. Aftermath and Legacy. Once the dust settles, Emperor Guangwu doesn't just stop at rebuilding walls. He lays groundwork for the Eastern Han Golden Age. Roads get fixed, tax reforms happen. He even revives Confucian exams to staff the bureaucracy. It's a rebound story for the ages. Without the uprising, would the Han have reformed? Maybe not. Those dyed brows forced the empire to reckon with its failings. Like a wake-up call, only louder. And here's a little twist you might not see coming. Some of those former rebels become hallmarks of stability. Local governors, tax collectors, even generals. They go from painting their faces red to wearing silk robes. It's the ultimate character arc. From nobodies to somebody's sons-in-law. If life's a movie, that's the kind of plot twist you'd fast forward to, but in real life it was slow, messy, and oh so human. Let's wind down with a reflection. The Red Eyebrows Rebellion wasn't just a footnote. It's a testament to resilience, desperation, and the absurd lengths people will go to reclaim dignity. It reminds us that power is fragile, and legitimacy isn't inherited, it's earned. And when that legitimacy crumbles, you get eyebrows. Bright red ones. Before I let you go, here's a mind-blowing final detail. Archaeologists recently dug up clay tablets from Luoyang that mention paying rebels to guard imperial granaries. So for a brief moment, the Han were literally paying the red eyebrows to babysit food stores. It's like hiring the bank robbers to guard your vault. History is wild. All right, if you stuck around this long, you deserve a medal, or at least a subscription. If you enjoyed this trip back to Ancient Rebellion, hit subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into history's most epic uprisings. Got questions? Drop them below. Maybe next time, I'll dye my eyebrows red for real. No promises. Thanks for watching, and remember, when the world's burning down, sometimes you just need a bold eyebrow moment. See you in the next one. Picture this, a hidden mountain kingdom so daring it stormed the Tang capital and shook the Silk Road, yet almost no one's heard of it. That's Nanzhao, and by the end of today's ride, you'll wonder why history forgot this rebel empire. Okay, so here's the deal. Today we're diving into Nanzhao. Think of it as the underdog story of medieval Asia, the one your history teacher totally glossed over. We're talking about a kingdom that sprouted in the 8th century, thrived in the highlands of what's now Yunnan province, and built a cultural mashup so unique, it still blows scholars' minds. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll see why the rise and fall of Nanzhao is the kind of epic tale you'd binge watch on Netflix if someone greenlit it. Picture this. Jagged peaks rising so steep they slice the sky, rivers carving canyons deep enough to echo your shout for miles. That was home for the people of Nanzhao. Cold nights, thin air, but fertile valleys hidden like secret pockets. Underneath all that rugged beauty was a culture that stitched together influences from Tibet, India, Southeast Asia, and, of course, the Chinese heartlands. It's like someone took the best spices from every kitchen on the Silk Road and tossed them into one giant boiling pot. But wait, before we get lost in the clouds, let me ask you, have you ever wondered what it takes for a mountain tribe to build an army capable of capturing Chang'an, the Tang capital? I mean, that's like a small-town football squad storming the Super Bowl and scoring a touchdown. Here's where it gets weird. The Nanzhao army didn't march in lockstep like most imperial legions. They moved with guerrilla tactics, leveraging every forest, cliff, and canyon to ambush opponents. Surprise was their currency, and they spent it lavishly. Okay, quick break. If you've ever been ambushed in your own backyard paintball game, you know the adrenaline rush. Now imagine that, but the stakes are dynastic power and tens of thousands of lives. That adrenaline fueled Nanzhao's military campaigns. By the early 750s, they'd teamed up with the Tang dynasty to push back against the Tibetan Empire, only to turn on their supposed allies a few years later. Plot twist, they sacked the very capital they once pledged loyalty to. I didn't expect that either. Let's rewind further. The roots of Nanzhao trace back to the Chuan family, local chieftains who paid tribute to both the Tang and Tibetans like cautious gamblers hedging bets. Over time, these chieftains mutated into semi-independent kings, each one more ambitious than the last. Fast forward to 738 AD, and you get Piluoge, the guy historians call the founding monarch. Piluoge unified 6 local tribes under one banner. You've seen unite the clans tropes.
Now imagine Piluoge standing atop a hill, breeze whipping his hair, looking out over a patchwork of valley villages lighting torches below. He's got a vision not just of conquest, but of a kingdom where local customs survived side by side with Buddhism, Confucian bureaucracies, and even remnants of Zoroastrian cults from Persian merchants. Mixed signals? Maybe. Brilliant mosaic? Definitely. Speaking of Buddhism, Nanzhao wasn't just about military fireworks. It was a cultural cauldron. Monasteries carved into cliff faces, prayer flags snapping in the wind, and statues 2 stories tall looming over misty rivers. But here's the thing. These monasteries doubled as administrative centers. Monks served as scribes and tax collectors, turning religion into a powerhouse of statecraft. Check your purse before you pray. Seems harsh. But in Nanzhao, faith and finance rode the same elephant. Let me pause. Hands in the air, if you thought medieval kingdoms were all heavy armor and sword fights. Surprise! Nanzhao's wealth came from controlling trade routes. Silk, tea, horses, spices, you name it. Caravans zigzagged through passes so narrow you swear a goat couldn't squeeze through. Yet somehow, endless rows of camels and mules managed it. Every trader who made it through paid a toll, and those tolls lined royal coffers. So while the Tang coffers were emptying from frontier wars, Nanzhao's treasury jingled like a novice juggler's coin purse. And here's where history throws you a curveball. In 750 AD, Piluoge's successors teamed up with the Tang to crush the very Tibetan threat they once feared. You know how friendships in college start with you sharing notes and end with you ditching your roommate for the rival's rooftop party? Same vibe. Alliances switched faster than t-shirts in summer. One moment you're bros, the next you're plotting betrayal over dim sum. Fast forward to the golden age under King Zhi Li, mid-9th century. This dude was the ultimate influencer, minus Instagram. He standardized weights and measures, codified laws, and sent embassies as far as Kashmir and Haripunchai, modern northern Thailand. Imagine envoys traveling hundreds of miles through jungles, deserts, and mountain passes, rolling out official seals stamped with Nanzhao's emblem. That's brand expansion at its medieval best. But hold up, what goes up must come down, right? Here's where the story turns tragic. By the late 860s, internal factions and court intrigue shredded the kingdom like paper in a windstorm. Rival princes vied for the throne, alliances fell apart, and the very monasteries that fueled the state turned into battlegrounds. The Tang were too busy fending off.
I know what you're thinking. Oh great, another medieval kingdom bites the dust. But the real twist? Out of the ashes rose the kingdom of Dali, carrying forward Nanzhao's legacy for another 4 centuries. It's like the final season spin-off nobody saw coming. Yet somehow, it kept the storyline alive. Art, architecture, language, traces of Nanzhao lingered in Dali temples and local dialects long after the original kingdom faded. So what's the takeaway here? Nanzhao teaches us that history isn't just a straight line of empires rising and falling. It's a messy, colorful tapestry, full of unexpected alliances, cultural cross-pollination, and empires that dared to be different. It's a reminder that mountain tribes aren't primitive. They can be visionaries, innovators, and formidable foes to empires 10 times their size. Here's a little mind-blower. Modern Yunnan is one of China's most ethnically diverse regions, home to groups like the Yi, Bai, and Naji, descendants, some say, of the Nanzhao people. Every time you sip pu'er tea or admire those intricate Dongba scripts, you're touching echoes of a kingdom that once rewrote the rules of power in one of the most rugged corners of Asia. If you've ever felt intimidated by the idea that history's already written, think again. Nanzhao's story reminds us that hidden chapters are everywhere, just waiting for someone to dust off the scrolls and read them out loud. It's like finding a bonus level in your favorite game, unexpected, thrilling, and totally worth exploring. All right, before we call it a wrap, did you catch your jaw hitting the floor when I said Nanzhao sacked Chang'an? Or when I revealed they ran a theocratic bureaucracy out of cliff monasteries? Let me know in the comments which part blew your mind the most. And hey, if you learned something new, or if you just want to support my quest to unearth history's hidden gems, consider hitting that like button or subscribing for more deep dives into obscure kingdoms. No pressure though. I'm here to share stories, not beg for internet points. Well, maybe just a little. Thanks for hanging out, and until next time, keep wondering what other lost kingdoms are waiting in the mountains, deserts, and forests of our past. Because trust me, the next story is even wilder. Peace out. Did you know that in just over 50 years, China splintered into more than a dozen rival states, each battling for the throne, only to be swallowed up by the next upstart? Imagine a world where emperors were toppled not by barbarians, but by their own generals, and poets hiding in tea houses recorded it all. Stick around, because this is the wild, almost forgotten era of the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms. And trust me, you've never heard Chinese history like this. All right, so what are we diving into today? We're talking about the chaos after the fall of the mighty Tang dynasty in 907 AD, when the heart of China fractured into a kaleidoscope of warlord states. I know, chaos sounds dramatic, but imagine entire capitals rising and falling in the blink of an eye. Why should you care? Because this period set the stage for the reunification that birthed the Song dynasty, and it's packed with epic betrayals, poets on the run, and generals turning the battlefield into chessboards. Ready for a roller coaster? Let's rewind. The Tang dynasty was like China's golden age. Poetry, trade, cosmopolitan cities. But by the late 9th century, it was riddled with eunuch factions, mutinies, and regional governors carving out their own kingdoms. Picture officials quaking in their silk robes,
while horse soldiers camped in the imperial courtyard. That's the scene in 907 when Zhu Wen, a rebel turned general, poked the last Tang emperor aside and crowned himself the first ruler of the later Liang dynasty. Simple, right? Except nothing about this era is simple. Here's where it gets weird. Zhu Wen's later Liang lasted just 14 years, but in that time he chopped the empire into chunks, fighting rival warlords in a blur of sieges and assassinations. Capital city Xuanwu Fortress? Sacked. His own sons? Slaughtered in palace coups. You almost feel bad for the guy, except, well, he was pretty ruthless. Meanwhile, in Hebei province, the warlord Li Keiyong served beer and ballots in taverns to sway local soldiers. He wasn't messing around. His son Li Chunshu eventually marched south, marched north, and before you know it, he annihilated the later Liang and proclaimed the later Tang dynasty in 923. But hold up, later Tang doesn't mean the Tang returned. No, it was more like a cosplay. Li Chunshu claimed Tang blood, but his court was all about military camaraderie, drinking poetry contests, and secret dagger plots. And guess what? This flashy court culture couldn't stop one of his own ministers, Guo Chongtao, from being murdered by paranoid princes. Blood spilled in lantern-lit corridors, and by 936, another palace coup shoved the later Tang aside for the later Jin. Later Jin, established by Shi Jingtang in 936, made a deal with the Khitan Liao Empire in the north. Help me take the throne, and I'll hand you strategic prefectures. You know what that smells like? Betrayal. Sure enough, Shi owes his throne to foreign cavalry coming across the Great Wall. His realm stunk of resentment. Imagine signing over key border garrisons to outsiders. When Shi died, his successor refused to hand over extra territory, and the Liao marched in, toppling later Jin in 947. Poof, another dynasty gone. Now in the meantime, the south had broken off too. While the north played dynastic musical chairs, southern governors planted their flags. There were kingdoms like Wu, based around the lower Yangtze, where courtiers composed ballads on lotus ponds as generals dueled at dawn. And in Wu Yu, a small but wealthy maritime realm, they built pagodas that still stand today, living art that outlived their wars. Each of these 10 kingdoms, Min, Chu, Southern Han, former Shu, later Shu, Jingnan, Southern Tang, Northern Han, was its own story, with princes who styled themselves poets and soldiers who declared themselves kings. Picture this. In Southern Tang, Emperor Li Bian turned his capital Jinling into a sanctuary of silk, tea, and fine lacquerware. He patronized poets like Li Yu, whose love songs are still quoted when someone's heart is broken. But the irony? While Li Yu wrote about lost love, his armies crumbled before Song forces, and he ended his days as a captive, penning verses about exile. Heartbreaking, right? Meanwhile, up in the fractured north, generals installed puppet emperors like chess pieces. One moment, the later Han dynasty was born in 947 under Liu Jiyuan, a general from Hedong. Short-lived? Totally. It collapsed by 951 under its own court intrigues. Then Guo Wei, founder of the later Zhou, seized power, but, plot twist, supported reforms to reduce military dominance and invest in civil administration. He actually tried to rebuild order. It worked for a bit. But when Guo died in 954, his child emperor left the throne to Zhao Kuangyin, his top general. Zhao didn't just accept the transfer. He famously staged a midnight coup at Chengqiao, telling soldiers, "Our borders will be unstable until one man unites the realm."
They crowned him Emperor Taizu of Song in 960, ending the 5 dynasties. Cue dramatic drum roll.
So why do we care about this carousel of dynasties and kingdoms? Because this very chaos birthed innovations, movable type printing, paper money experiments, and early urbanization patterns that foreshadowed the Song Golden Age. It's like watching skyscrapers rise from rubble. Also, think about the human stories. Poets thrown to the wolves, generals redecorating palaces overnight, courtesans running spying rings from silk pavilions. It's history with the volume cranked up. Here's a quick breather. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt trapped by your surroundings? Imagine serving as prime minister in a tiny warlord state, knowing you might be beheaded by dawn. No judgments, just how's that for workplace stress? Back to the story. Let's zoom into Wu. Based in modern-day Jiangsu, this kingdom survived until 937, when its ruler Yang Pu, better known for his calligraphy than his conquests, abdicated to southern Tang. Legend says he spent his final days writing Buddhist sutras in a bamboo pavilion. That's contrast, monk-like calm after palace intrigue. Meanwhile in Min, over in Fujian, the Zhou family battled incestuous power struggles. Brothers executed brothers. One king married his mother's maid. You can't make this stuff up. Their realm splintered into rival polities, making them easy pickings for southern Tang's armies. And all along, merchants in the port city of Quanzhou shipped porcelain to Arabia, unaware of the decaying dynasty at home. And what about former Shu? Right in Sichuan's fertile basin, Wang Jian declared independence in 907. He gave his officials more land than their horses could carry. His son, Wang Zhongyan, threw glittering banquets, bankers flouted credit, and the people built grand Buddhist temples. But after Wang Jian died, his heir gorged on luxuries, Don's ginger wine and painted silk fans, while his armies neglected northern passes. Guess who stormed in? Yep, the later Tang came calling in 925, and former Shu folded like origami. You see a pattern: strong founders, decadent successors, outside invasion. But then the pattern shifted under the Song. The Song emperors, especially Taizu, co-opted these generals, recruited civil bureaucrats, and built a meritocracy with exams to curb military power. They learned from the mistakes of the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms. They turned the page to stability, supporting commerce and tech over the sword. And voila, China began its next golden age. So, before we wrap up, let's rewind one last time. Think of the 5 dynasties as a frantic relay race. Dynasties passing a blood-stained baton, each leader sprinting to outdo the last, but stumbling over court conspiracies. And the 10 kingdoms? They're like side stories, pockets of culture and commerce, each with their own flavor. Tea in Wuya, silk in southern Tang, porcelain in Min. It's mosaic history, each tile colored by ambition and art. Here's the takeaway: chaos can be a crucible for creativity. You don't have to worship stability to appreciate it. Empires crumble, but human ingenuity, printing presses, trade networks, poetry in exile, survives. Next time someone tells you history is dull, remind them of a poet king exiled to a lake palace, scribbling verses as his empire collapsed. Now that's drama. If you made it this far, give yourself a pat on the back. And hey, if you're hungry for more cliffhangers from history's wild side, consider hitting that like button or dropping a comment with which kingdom story you want next. No pressure, just another tea leaf in this long, flowing river of history. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. What if I told you that the guy who convinced Genghis Khan to stop slaughtering entire cities was a bookish scholar in flowing robes, someone who believed in paperwork over bloodshed? Picture standing in the tent of the world's most feared warrior and arguing for mercy. Wild, right? Stick around, because this is the story of Yelu Chuchai, and trust me, you've never heard history like this. Let's set the scene. It's the early 13th century. The Mongol horde is sweeping across Asia like an unstoppable storm, and every city in their path falls under the shadow of annihilation. Enter a young Khitan scholar,
barely out of his 20s, stepping into the glare of Mongol power. No armor, no sword, just ink, scrolls, and Confucian ideals. You might be thinking, why should I care about some medieval bureaucrat? Because, let's be honest, a guy who talks down Genghis Khan? That's binge-worthy gold. Imagine the crunch of camels' hooves on dusty roads, the roar of tents flapping in the wind, and the smell of roasting meat mingling with the ever-present tension of imminent violence. Now imagine a calm voice rising above it all, quoting ancient Confucian wisdom to the man who'd toppled empires. That's the visual we're chasing, so take a deep breath. Here we go. Yelu Chuchai was born in 1190 into a Khitan family that had once ruled parts of northern China. By the time he came along, the Liao dynasty was ancient history, and Khitan identity was fading into the mosaic of people under Jin rule. From an early age, Chuchai, or Yelu the Talented, as his name roughly translates, showed a knack for learning. He devoured poetry, history, philosophy. While his peers might have been dreaming of military glory, Chuchai was scribbling commentaries on Confucius. I mean, who does that when the world's on fire? But that intellectual spark would become his greatest weapon. Fast forward to 1221. Genghis Khan, after raising the Khwarezmian Empire and teaching the world the true meaning of scorched earth, is rolling through northern China. His advisors tell him to just kill everyone and move on. It's fast, it's brutal, but it's quick. Into this maelstrom steps Yelu Chuchai. He somehow secures an audience, crazy, right? And decides to pitch a radically different plan. Your Majesty, he says, there is value in these people. Let them live, tax them, and our empire will grow even richer. Cue the raised eyebrows in the tent.
Now, here's where it gets weird. The story goes that Chuchai stood rock solid as Genghis's lieutenants roared for blood. He argued that cultivating agriculture, administering justice, and collecting revenue would do more to sustain the empire than endless slaughter. And, this is the mind-blowing part, Genghis listened. Instead of burning captured towns to cinders, he ordered them spared. Census rolls were drawn up, taxes were imposed. Suddenly, the Mongol machine had a bureaucratic backbone. I didn't expect this either. This wasn't just paperwork for paperwork's sake. It changed lives. Farmers were allowed to return to their fields rather than flee the horizon in terror. Merchants reopened caravans, reconnecting Silk Road routes that had sputtered under the thunder of hooves. Grain shipments stabilized the army's supply lines. Sure, it sounds dry, but picture it like this. One day, you're running for your life. The next, you're paying a modest levy and wondering if maybe, just maybe, life under Mongol rule isn't the apocalypse you feared. That pivot? That's Chuchai's doing. But he didn't stop at taxes. He introduced policies against wanton destruction of irrigation works and granaries. Because what's the point of conquering a region if it can't feed itself? He convinced Genghis to respect local customs to some degree, using familiar legal frameworks instead of arbitrary brutality. And every step of the way, he peppered his speeches with Confucian quotes about benevolence and righteousness. Think about that. In a world where the loudest voice was kill them all, Chuchai whispered, let's talk this through. Talk about crazy courage. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. Some Mongol generals scoffed at the notion of treating conquered people like, well, people. They wanted forced labor, they wanted terror, they wanted to break spirits. But Chuchai had earned Genghis's personal respect. And when your boss is the most powerful man on earth, you get some leverage. Even if you're the only guy in the room without a bow. When Genghis died in 1227, you might have guessed our scholar lost his champion. Surprise, he didn't. Ogedei Khan, Genghis's third son and successor, also recognized Chuchai's value. He kept him on as chief advisor. Now it's one thing to serve the conqueror.
It's another to navigate the palace politics of a freshly minted Khagan who's juggling rival tribes, family feuds, and his own plans. Yet Chukai managed to thrive, pushing forward administrative reforms that would evolve into the Yuan dynasty's civil service. I'm telling you, this guy was the original bureaucratic influencer. Picture a dusty hall in Karakoram, the Mongol capital, where clerks in pell-mell scribble mountain after mountain of documents. That's Chukai's legacy, turning the Mongol elite into reluctant fans of red tape. He even worked to integrate Confucian scholars into the administration. Okay, quick check-in. If you thought medieval history was all about knights and jousts, welcome to the real world, where a scholar changes the course of an empire with a pen. But we're just scratching the surface. Back to the story. Chukai also wrote extensively letters, memorials, essays, arguing for justice, humane treatment, even education for the Mongol princes. In one famous petition, he lamented that the grandsons of Genghis might grow up illiterate if they followed only the ways of the steppe. He asked for schools, tutors, texts. The idea that Mongol princes should memorize the analects? That's Yelu Chukai planting seeds in frozen soil. Crazy to imagine a horse lord reciting Confucius, right? Definitely not what Hollywood shows. But real history is full of delicious twists. As he aged, Chukai's influence waxed and waned. He negotiated treaties, moderated taxes during famines, and even handled diplomatic missions to southern Song China. Every time someone said, "We must crush them," he'd whisper, "Or we could govern them." And every time he whispered, Mongol policy tilted a little toward administration and away from apocalypse. By the time he passed away in 1244, Chukai had built structures, literal and bureaucratic, that outlived him. His civil codes and tax systems formed the backbone of the Yuan dynasty's governance. Centuries later, Chinese historians looked back and credited him as the man who humanized Mongol rule and laid foundations for stability.
And yet, how many of us learned his name in school?
That's why we're here. To spotlight the underdog who transformed a terror empire into an administrative powerhouse. So what's the takeaway? Sometimes the sharpest swords aren't forged of steel. They're made of words. Yelu Chukai reminds us that intellect and compassion can survive, even thrive, in the harshest environments. He teaches that change often comes from the most unexpected voices, like a Khitan scholar advising Mongol conquerors. And he shows us that history isn't just battles and kingship, it's ideas taking root in unlikely soil and reshaping worlds. Feeling inspired? Here's a cliffhanger for you. What might our world look like if more people channeled their inner Chukai, choosing dialogue over destruction? Let me know in the comments your real-life examples of diplomacy winning out over chaos. If this trip into the wild side of medieval bureaucracy blew your mind, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that flip history on its head. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Alright, that's a wrap on Yelu Chukai, the man who put ink before iron, mercy before massacre, and left a legacy written in scrolls, not just scorched earth. In tandem with court duties, Ban Zhao authored The Lessons for Women, a guidebook on female comportment, ethics, and domestic management. Far from a superficial treatise on etiquette, her text laid out principles for cultivating filial piety, maintaining household harmony, and exercising moral influence over one's husband and children. Some modern readers balk at its prescriptions, advice on submissiveness or roles within the family, but in context it granted women an intellectual framework to wield subtle political power. Her words became touchstones for Confucian womanhood, studied for centuries by daughters of elite families. Court life itself was a delicate dance of alliances and rivalries. Within the Forbidden City's courtyard, lacquered columns rose like silent sentinels, while eunuchs carried messages cloaked in silk pouches.
Ban Zhao navigated this labyrinthine world deftly, her reputation for scholarship shielding her from the worst intrigues. Yet she was far from aloof. Correspondence reveals poetic letters exchanged with Han dignitaries, expressions of sympathy on matters of grief and grief counsel, and even pointed critiques of tax policies that harmed peasant families. Her pen spoke for the voiceless as much as for the emperors. A lesser-known facet of her legacy lies in standardizing Chinese characters. During her era, scripts varied widely. Regional strokes diverged and cursive forms confounded learners. Ban Zhao codified orthographic rules, precise stroke order, proportional character structure, and consistent radical placement. Calligraphy schools still trace their lineage to her conventions, and textbooks of East Asia owe her meticulous system for teaching writing. In every classroom where Chinese is taught today, echoes of Ban Zhao's hand guide the student's brush. The familial thread remains central. Ban Zhao's grief at her brother Bangu's death found eloquent expression in elegiac poetry, lines drenched in sorrow, yet suffused with philosophical reflection on life's impermanence. Imagery of withering chrysanthemums and autumn winds carries the weight of her loss, transforming personal tribulation into universal meditation. These verses are among the earliest extant works by a Chinese woman, a testament to her literary prowess and emotional depth.
Historians have pieced together anecdotes that reveal her unflinching confidence. One tale recounts her discreet correction of the emperor's calligraphy, politely adjusting a misplaced stroke in a draft, then stepping back while the sovereign acknowledged her expertise without hesitation. The story encapsulates her singular blend of humility and authority, a scholar unwavering in pursuit of accuracy, yet ever mindful of decorum.
Ban Zhao's role in foreign policy consultations also surfaces in fragmentary records. As the Han court faced recurring raids by the Xiongnu nomads, envoys sought her insights on diplomatic overtures and treaty language. She drafted dispatches that balanced firmness with conciliation, advocating both strategic marriages and measured tributes. In effect, she operated as an early diplomat, her pen shaping alliances and preserving fragile peace. The arc of her life converged in her later years, as she witnessed the court's shifting fortunes. She served under Emperor He, whose capricious reign tested her resilience. Even as factional strife threatened senior ministers, Ban Zhao's reputation kept her at the center of intellectual life. She continued teaching, writing marginalia on ancestral rituals, and mentoring young scholars, male and female alike. When she passed in 116 AD, mourners gathered in the temple courtyard, offering incense and reciting lines from her own poetry. In the centuries that followed, her memory dimmed in the Western world, obscured by patriarchal retellings that sidelined women's contributions. Yet within China, her writings endured. Rediscovered by Qing-era scholars, her lessons for women became required reading in academies. Modern feminist historians celebrate Ban Zhao as a pioneering intellectual, whose works provide rare windows into women's lives in antiquity. Imagine unearthing one of her original scrolls today. The lustrous silk frayed at the edges, characters faint but legible, the ink a muted echo of the scholar's brush. In each stroke lies not just the recounting of events, but a gentle challenge to the conventions of her age, a reminder that history is written by those bold enough to claim the pen. Her life raises enduring questions about voice and authority. When the chronicles of empires bear only one perspective, how many stories remain untold? Ban Zhao's intervention reminds us that every narrative is incomplete until all voices are heard. Her legacy reverberates in classrooms, libraries, and digital archives, urging us to seek out the hidden figures whose courage reshapes our collective memory. In the final analysis, Ban Zhao was more than a court scholar or historian. She was a cultural bridge, connecting the moral philosophy of the classics with the lived realities of palace women, blending the precision of record-keeping with the lyricism of poetry, and transmuting personal grief into universal insight. Her life demonstrates that scholarship need not be divorced from empathy, that power can be wielded with humility, and that the quiet stroke of a brush sometimes wields more influence than the clang of a sword.